Hi, this is Brent with Trade Therapy, and welcome back to the Trading Couch. We're talking about BABA, our clarity spotlight. Our lesson last week was really pretty simple. It was time over level. When China exposures keep reclaiming and holding key decision levels through quiet pullbacks, headlines become timing tools, not signals. So the question we're going to answer in this video is pretty straightforward. Is BABA in a durable cycle transition that can sustain a new uptrend, or is this just a temporary bounce that will fade back into the broader consolidation? Before we get to BABA, a quick disclaimer. This video, as well as all trade therapy content, is for educational purposes only. It's not investment advice. Trading involves risk, including the risk of loss. Do your own due diligence and manage your risk according to your own plan and your own risk tolerance. We're going to start with this yen versus yang, which is the leverage long versus the leverage short ETFs. We're using this ratio as a positioning proxy, not to trade the leveraged products, but to keep ourselves honest about risk appetite. When long exposure consistently stays in control relative to short exposure, it tells you the market's still willing to fund the theme. So that tells you that emerging markets and China, that theme is still being funded. Long-term control of the long side of the trade, confirming that when you see the ratios start turning over and start losing these moving averages as it rolls over, that's often the first place you start seeing hedging and caution show up. Even if the headline or the leading tickers are still look fine for a few sessions. So the role of this chart is really pretty simple. It answers one question before we even talk about BABA. And that is the China theme being pressed as exposure, or is it being treated as trade? What we see here is a series of higher lows, series of higher highs being supported on volume. We do see bullish divergence showing in the momentum indicators. So this tells us that all of the signals are demonstrating ongoing support to China exposures and demonstrating ongoing support to the China theme. That's really what we're looking to get out of this yen versus yang chart, is whether or not there is support. Are we seeing an uptrend? Are we seeing healthy signals out of the sector in general? And we are. We started our coverage on BABA by looking back to July of last year. We used a video. I'm going to use a chart here. Back in July of last year, we were watching this pullback to these rising moving averages. There was a pivot here that had been acting as resistance for BABA for several years. Price had gotten above that and it backed up, and we were watching to see if we were going to get another one of these giant moves that BABA had done historically when price breaks out and back tests over these pivot levels, that you see these giant extensions. And so we were talking about getting your plan together to ride the giant. What target levels would we be watching if we were going to see price hold here, which is really what we were looking for. And that really sums up our lesson from last week in one sentence. But we want to see price hold above this level. Time over this level would demonstrate that Wall Street is supporting BABA here, that we are transitioning out of this long buying range or this long accumulation phase and into the next phase of the institutional business cycle, which would be markup from this point. So we wanted to see whether or not the market was going to accept higher prices over time. And so if we jump over to last week's chart, you can see that we did get that extension. We did see price push off of those moving averages as they crossed over the blue longer term moving average. We can see BABA did bounce. And now the question is whether or not we're going to see ongoing support. You see this series of signs of strength and back tests, that these higher lows are being maintained and now supported by these moving averages. So what you want to see at this stage isn't constant momentum. You want to see that the campaign is being managed. And what that means is as profits are taking on these extensions, that these pullbacks are being bought up at the moving averages. They're not creating deeper retracements down into lower levels like they were during the markdown process. Now that we've begun the mark-up process and the uptrends here, we're wanting to see these pullbacks controlled and maintained. We want to see continued support and continued strength off of these rising moving averages. When you see that behavior repeating, usually means larger interests are maintaining exposure through these pullbacks rather than using these rallies to exit their position. If we take an even further step back and look at the all-time monthly chart here, monthly is great because it can It condenses the full month's headlines trading and everything down into one candle. But the close on the monthly is what's important. We're only 2 weeks into this month, so we've got a couple of more weeks before we reach the close here on the monthly candle. But what we can see is this series of higher highs and higher lows. We can see the moving averages, these pullbacks are coming down and catching this rising 9 month exponential moving average right there, showing support by larger operators. Wall Street is buying the dip here and controlling these pullbacks. These are telltale signs of an uptrend. It shows us that these controlled pauses are not developing into deeper givebacks. It also shows up with these quick recoveries. So you see this pullback into a quick recovery. You see this pullback in a quick recovery. So that behavior repeating tells us that it's behaving like a market that has moved out of this repair zone and back into an uptrend zone. You can see that this is repair. It moves into an uptrend. This is repair. It moves into an uptrend. Been in this long period of repair here. So now we think that it's time for BABA to move into the next level of expansion. And it's interesting because it also is set up as a 1, 2, 3 wave price cycle. We did revisit the 3 wave price cycle, which is the first 3 waves of an impulsive 5 wave Elliott wave cycle. But for this discussion, just keeping an eye on wave 3, which is the most expansive and strongest leg of the 3 wave price cycle, it shows where participation really starts to broaden, and the move can travel a lot farther and a lot faster than most people expect. We'll jump back over to the monthly here. So we see wave 1, we see wave 2, and we're just now getting into the beginnings of wave 3. And if you think about if you go back to the weekly from last week, you could see the 1618 extension is at 916 from the post-COVID high-low extension here. These higher target ranges for BABA start to really get interesting when you consider that previously the high-low extension at 1618, BABA actually went up higher than that and went up to a 272 extension. So if you're thinking that 916 is a long way off from 165, it is, but BABA has historically produced much larger runs than that. Just food for thought for now. As we get deeper into our analysis, we're going to jump over to BABX here. BABX is the leveraged bull, leveraged long BABA ETF. We are long BABX. We are long YINN. We're long FUTU. Those are our China exposures. We've maintained our exposures throughout this cycle and will continue to. The BABX weekly here really shows how when leverage starts breaking out first, it often tells you that the risk appetite's being expressed aggressively, that institutions and professional money are looking for more aggressive ways to leverage their investment into the trade. When you see leveraged assets breaking out faster than the underlying asset itself, it shows you that risk is being expressed aggressively. It also tends to leave behind big volume support. And you can see that we're seeing that big volume supporting here, pushing these leveraged products up higher through this overhead supply. We do have a little bit of overhead supply to work through here, but the encouraging thing that we're noticing here is the rising series of higher lows, series of higher highs. We're seeing the extensions where profit is taken, but then positions are reloaded back at the moving averages. This tells us that Wall Street and larger institutions are not using these extensions to abandon their position. They're using these extensions to take profit and then reload their positions. As it works up through overhead supply, it's important that these pullbacks maintain support at these levels. That shows absorption. That shows that the demand greater than supply conditions are working their way back into control as the supply is absorbed by buyers. You also see a reference to a wave 5 here. I want to be very clear about how we use wave language. Wave framing is descriptive. It's not predictive. It's a way to describe the phase of the move, not a reason to ignore what price is doing. So if BABX and BABA are holding gains and building acceptance near the highs, that's consistent with an expansion attempt. If they're starting to fail those tests and spending more time below the trend than they are above it, that's the market telling you that more time is needed. And that would mean that this wave 4 could be extending down here. So just because you see an Elliott wave referenced in our chart, that does not necessarily mean that we don't have ongoing conditions that could develop and change our Elliott count as price builds out its charts. We wrapped up our featured analysis with BABA's daily chart. The daily chart's really interesting because it really tells a story about pullback quality. What I mean by that is we talked about how profit is taken at these extensions, but the pullbacks are maintaining the longer term rising supporting averages. That tells us that support is remaining consistent as it works its way through this phase, this breakout of the accumulation of repair zone into an uptrend. You see the quality of these backups or these pullbacks is very high. We're not seeing them develop into further back tests to come back and test these additional or these lower lows. It's maintaining its relationship with its rising moving averages. That's important. That tells us that the ongoing support is there, that Wall Street and institutions are looking at this trade on an ongoing basis. It's not something that they're coming in and looking to just take profits out of and abandon. It's something that they're consistently continuing to support and consistently continuing to pull profit out of. And so at this point, there's no indication in the different time frames for BABA, whether it be monthly, weekly, or daily, that indicates anything other than continuation of this trend. We do see bullish divergence developed in the daily chart. And that's really what we're going to be watching out for, is these pullbacks to make sure they stay contained, make sure they maintain the relationship with these moving averages. We see the price has retaken a Fibonacci level here. It'll be interesting to watch and see if it can use that as support to push off of and continue expand and continue price expansion as it works its way up through this overhead supply. Real quick cycle mechanics concept that ties the entire featured section together in a healthy campaign. But markets tend to spend more time above reclaimed decision levels than below it. It's not just about one breakout candle. It's about a trend. You want to see breakout above these decision levels, back test it, and then reclaim it very quickly. We reclaim this level, it back tests this structure right here, and then quickly reclaims it, comes down, back tests this structure right here. We're going to want to see price expansion above that, probably come back and retest that structure right there. If we wrap it up, the yin over yang ratio is really the conviction checkpoint. It tells us that the theme is still being funded. The BABA Weekly shows the roadmap is still working. Reclaim, hold, controlled digestion instead of a full give back, and then continuation is really the name of the game for BABA. That's what we're going to be watching. We're seeing it consistently across all of the different time frames. Great looking chart. We're long with a conviction size position in BABX. We're still long Futu and yen. We feel very good about the China trade in emerging markets for the rest of this year. That's all the time we've got for BABA this week. We'll see you back here on the Trading Couch next week.